John and Alice lived a life familiar to many. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The monotony of their routine was as predictable as the sunrise. John, a man of quiet diligence, dedicated his days to his factory job. The rhythmic clang of machinery provided a constant soundtrack to his life. Alice, his wife, possessed a similar work ethic. Her days were spent navigating the organized chaos of a shipping warehouse. Their lives, though far from glamorous, were theirs. They shared a modest home, a testament to years of shared dreams and quiet sacrifices. The walls, adorned with faded family portraits, whispered stories of their journey. Laughter, though infrequent, still found its way into their home, a reminder of the love that bound them. Their evenings were spent in comfortable silence. John, his face etched with the day's fatigue, would sink into his armchair, the newspaper his only companion. Alice, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, would prepare their simple dinner. They spoke little, their words mere whispers against the backdrop of the evening news. Their life, though lacking in extravagance, held a certain comfort. It was a life built on routine, on shared responsibility, on unspoken love. They had grown accustomed to the predictable rhythm of their existence, their dreams tucked away, replaced by the quiet acceptance of their reality. Theirs was a world of ordinary struggles, of small joys, of unspoken longing. One Saturday, in a bid to break free from their routine, they found themselves wandering through a local antique shop. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged wood and forgotten treasures. Objects, each bearing the weight of time and untold stories, lined the shelves. Alice, her gaze drawn to a chipped porcelain doll, felt a pang of nostalgia for a simpler time. John, meanwhile, found himself captivated by a tarnished brass teapot tucked away in a dusty corner. Its surface, dull and unassuming, held a strange allure. The shopkeeper, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of secrets, watched them with quiet amusement. He sensed their curiosity, their unspoken desire for something more. "That's a curious piece," the shopkeeper rasped, his voice a low murmur that seemed to blend with the creaking floorboards. He went on to explain that the teapot, according to local law, possessed a unique magic. "It rewards pain with wealth," he said, his words barely audible above the ticking of an ancient grandfather clock. John, ever the pragmatist, dismissed the shopkeeper's claims as mere folklore. Alice, however, felt a flicker of intrigue. The thought of magic, however improbable, offered a tantalizing escape from the mundane reality of their lives. With a mix of skepticism and reluctant fascination, they purchased the teapot, unaware of the profound impact it would have on their lives. It was a decision made on a whim that would unravel the carefully woven tapestry of their existence. Back home, the teapot sat on their kitchen table, an unwelcome guest in their world of predictable routine. John, ever the skeptic, chuckled at the absurdity of the shopkeeper's claims. Alice, however, couldn't shake off a lingering curiosity. The teapot, with its tarnished surface and unassuming form, seemed to pulsate with a silent energy. "What if it's true?" Alice whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. John, engrossed in the evening news, merely grunted in response. He dismissed her words as fanciful thinking, a product of her exhaustion, yet a seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. Later that night, unable to resist the allure of the unknown, Alice tentatively extended her hand towards the teapot. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal, sending a shiver down her spine. Closing her eyes, she braced herself and pressed her thumb against the teapot's spout. A sharp pain shot through her hand, causing her to recoil in surprise. "What was that?" John asked, startled by her sudden gasp. Alice stared at her hand in disbelief. A small bead of blood welled up where her thumb had touched the spout. As if in answer to her unspoken question, a faint clinking sound emanated from within the teapot. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted the lid. Her eyes widened in astonishment. Nestled inside the teapot, gleaming under the dim kitchen light, lay a solitary silver dollar. The discovery sent a jolt of excitement through their weary souls. The impossible, it seemed, had become their reality. What began as hesitant experimentation quickly transformed into a thrilling game. A stubbed toe, a pinched finger, a deliberate bump against the kitchen counter. Each act of self-inflicted pain brought forth its reward. The clinking of coins became a siren song, a melody that promised an escape from their mundane existence. The initial fear gave way to a strange sense of exhilaration. With each clang of metal against metal, they chipped away at the walls of their predictable lives. The mundane routine that had once defined their days was replaced by a relentless pursuit of discomfort. They sought out pain with a fervour that bordered on obsession. A broken vase resulted in a handful of quarters. A scalding burn from a hot iron yielded a $5 bill. The house, once a sanctuary of familiar comfort, transformed into a battleground of self-inflicted wounds. Yet, with each bruise, each burn, came a perverse sense of satisfaction. They were no longer bound by the limitations of their meagre salaries. They held the key to their own prosperity, even if that key was forged in pain. As the days blurred into weeks, a subtle shift occurred within their relationship. The initial excitement of their newfound wealth began to wane, replaced by a gnawing unease. The clinking of coins, once a symphony of hope, now echoed with whispers of guilt. John, his face growing increasingly gaunt, found himself haunted by the sight of Alice's bruised arms, her forced smiles masking a growing despair. He had become an accomplice in her suffering, his own greed fueling their descent into this macabre dance. Alice, once a beacon of warmth and gentle humour, grew increasingly withdrawn. Her eyes, once sparkling with life, now held a haunted, distant look. The pain, both physical and emotional, had taken its toll, etching lines of worry onto her once youthful face. The realization dawned on them slowly and insidiously that the price of their newfound wealth was far greater than they had anticipated. They had stumbled upon a path paved with good intentions, only to find themselves lost in a labyrinth of self-destruction. The whispers of guilt, once faint and easily ignored, grew louder with each passing day, threatening to consume them entirely. The line between necessity and greed blurred with each clinking coin. What started as a desperate attempt to ease their financial burden morphed into a twisted game. The thrill of acquiring wealth, even at the cost of their well-being, became an addictive elixir. John, his initial reservations long forgotten, embraced the perverse logic of their situation. He rationalized their actions, convincing himself that the ends justified the means. The factory job, once a source of resentment, now seemed like a distant memory, a relic of a life lived in naive innocence. Alice, her spirit slowly eroding under the weight of their secret, tried to cling to a semblance of normalcy. She hid her bruises beneath long sleeves, her forced smiles a fragile mask, concealing a growing despair. Yet the allure of their newfound wealth, the promise of a life free from financial constraints, proved too tempting to resist. Their conversations, once filled with mundane domesticity, now revolved around the macabre calculus of pain and profit. A broken bone, they discovered, yielded a small fortune. A deep cut, carefully inflicted, could finance a week's worth of groceries. Their home, once a haven of shared dreams, transformed into a stage for their self-inflicted suffering. As the weeks bled into months, a palpable darkness descended upon their once ordinary lives. The injuries, once minor and fleeting, escalated in severity. Bruises deepened into angry welts. Burns, etched onto their skin like grotesque tattoos, became grim badges of their prosperity. Sleep, once a sanctuary of blissful oblivion, became a battlefield of haunting nightmares. John would wake in a cold sweat, his mind replaying the sickening crunch of bone against metal. Alice, her body a tapestry of pain, found solace only in the brief moments of unconsciousness, the clinking of coins a constant lullaby in her troubled dreams. Their once warm embraces now carried the sharp edges of desperation. The intimacy they once shared, the gentle caresses and whispered words of love, were replaced by a cold, calculated exchange of pain for profit. The outside world, with its bustling streets and carefree laughter, seemed distant and unreal. They withdrew into the confines of their home, their secret a heavy chain tethering them to their self-destructive path. They became prisoners in their own gilded cage, the clinking of coins a constant reminder of the price they paid for their ill-gotten gains. Resentment, like a venomous weed, took root in the fertile ground of their despair. John, his conscience dulled by greed, blamed Alice for their predicament. He accused her of being the architect of their misery, conveniently forgetting his own complicity in their descent. Alice, her spirit broken by the relentless cycle of pain and guilt, retreated further into herself. She bore John's accusations with a stoic silence, her eyes reflecting a deep well of unspoken pain. The love they once shared, now a distant flicker in the darkness, threatened to be extinguished entirely. Their home, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, became a battleground of bitter accusations and recriminations. The walls, once adorned with family portraits and cherished mementos, now echoed with the sounds of their unravelling lives. The teapot, once a symbol of hope and possibility, now stood as a silent sentinel, a grim reminder of the chasm that had opened up between them. Its tarnished surface reflected their own distorted images, a haunting testament to the corrosive power of their greed. John's reflection in the teapot's surface was a stranger to him. His eyes, once filled with warmth and quiet amusement, now burned with a cold, calculating light. Lines of cruelty etched around his mouth and eyes spoke of a darkness that ran deeper than any physical pain. Alice, her reflection a pale ghost of her former self, barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her once bright eyes were now dull and lifeless, her skin stretched taut over protruding bones. The teapot, in its silent, malevolent way, had stripped away their humanity, leaving behind only hollow shells driven by an insatiable hunger for more. They had become slaves to the very object that had promised them liberation. The clinking of coins, once a sweet melody of hope, now sounded like the death knell of their souls. Each coin, stained with their pain and their guilt, pushed them further down the slippery slope of their self-destruction. The abyss, as the old adage warned, had indeed gazed back, and in its reflection they saw the monsters they had become. The realization, chilling and absolute, settled upon them like a shroud. They had traded their souls for a handful of silver, and in doing so had condemned themselves to a life of unending torment. The transition wasn't abrupt, but a slow, insidious creep. The weight of their actions, the ever-present guilt, began to lift, replaced by a chilling sense of control. The teapot, once a source of fear and fascination, became an instrument of their will. They discovered, with a mixture of horror and exhilaration, that the intensity of the pain directly correlated to the value of the reward. Minor injuries yielded paltry sums, but acts of significant violence, of self-inflicted brutality, brought forth unimaginable wealth. The boundaries of their morality, already blurred beyond recognition, dissolved completely. John, his hands trembling, brought a hammer down on his own fingers, the sickening crunch of bone eclipsed by the exhilarating clinking of gold coins cascading into the teapot. Alice, her eyes wide with a terrifying mix of terror and triumph, pressed a scorching hot iron against her bare arm, the smell of burning flesh a perverse incense to their newfound power. The teapot, bathed in the eerie glow of their madness, seemed to hum with a malevolent energy, its once dull surface now gleaming with an almost otherworldly light. Their home, once a testament to their love and shared dreams, transformed into a macabre chamber of horrors. The walls, stained with blood and sweat, bore silent witness to their descent into depravity. The air hung heavy with the metallic scent of blood and the cloying sweetness of decay. John, his body a patchwork of scars and fresh wounds, moved with a predatory grace, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying intensity. The factory job, a distant memory, held no allure for him now. He was a master of his own fate, the architect of his own twisted destiny. Alice, her once gentle touch now capable of inflicting unimaginable pain, moved through the shadows like a phantom, her laughter as brittle as bone china. The shipping warehouse, with its mundane routine and predictable chaos, seemed like a lifetime ago, a faded photograph of a life she no longer recognized. Their conversations, once filled with the comforting banalities of everyday life, now revolved around gruesome calculations of pain and profit. They spoke in hushed tones, their words a toxic cocktail of desperation, greed, and a chilling lack of remorse. The abyss, once a distant whisper, now beckoned them with open arms, promising untold riches in exchange for their souls. The outside world, with its rules and societal constraints, faded into insignificance. Their only reality was the one they had created within the four walls of their blood-soaked home. They had crossed a threshold, a point of no return, and there was no turning back. Neighbours, sensing something amiss, avoided their home, their whispers like frightened birds scattering at the approach of a predator. John and Alice, their faces hidden behind drawn curtains, revelled in their isolation. They had become a world unto themselves, their bond forged in blood and pain. Their physical appearances, once a source of pride, became grotesque parodies of their former selves. Their bodies, ravaged by self-inflicted wounds, bore the unmistakable marks of their obsession. Their eyes, once reflecting love and shared dreams, now burned with a cold, avaricious light. The teapot, once a simple household object, had become an idol, a malevolent deity to whom they offered their bodies and souls as sacrifices. They existed in a perpetual state of pain and exhaustion, their lives a gruesome testament to the corrupting power of unchecked greed. They were no longer capable of distinguishing right from wrong, their moral compasses shattered beyond repair. The money, once a symbol of hope and possibility, now felt tainted heavy with the weight of their sins. It piled up in their home, a macabre monument to their depravity. They slept on beds of $100 bills, their dreams haunted by the echoes of their own screams. The outside world, with its distractions and temptations, held no appeal for them. They were tethered to the teapot, bound by an invisible chain of their own making. The clinking of coins, once a siren song, now sounded like the rattling chains of their self-imposed prison. John, his mind teetering on the brink of madness, began to see conspiracies lurking in every shadow. He armed himself with an arsenal of weapons, convinced that the outside world was closing in, intent on stealing their ill-gotten gains. Alice, lost in a haze of pain and delusion, clung to the teapot with a desperate ferocity. It was her only solace, her only companion in a world that had grown increasingly dark and distorted. Their descent into madness was nearly complete, their humanity eroded by the corrosive power of their greed. Their daughter Lily, a beacon of normalcy in their increasingly twisted world, announced her impending visit. A wave of panic washed over John and Alice, a chilling premonition of their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of their secret. They scrambled to mask the physical manifestations of their depravity, their once familiar home transformed into a stage set for a macabre play. Bruises were concealed beneath layers of clothing, wounds hastily bandaged, the metallic scent of blood masked by pungent air fresheners. Their home, once filled with the comforting aroma of baking bread and Alice's signature potpourri, now reeked of desperation and deceit. Lily's arrival, a breath of fresh air in their suffocating world, filled them with a mixture of dread and a yearning for the normalcy they had so carelessly discarded. Her youthful energy, her laughter echoing through their silent home, served as a painful reminder of the life they had sacrificed at the altar of their greed. They watched her, their faces frozen in strained smiles, as she moved through their home, her eyes widening at the subtle signs of their decline. The once immaculate living room was now cluttered with unopened packages, extravagant purchases made with blood money. The dining table, once a place of shared meals and laughter, was now buried beneath a mountain of cash, a grotesque centerpiece in their theatre of the absurd. Lily, her youthful innocence blinding her to the true extent of their transformation, attributed their changed appearances and erratic behaviour to stress. She showered them with hugs and words of comfort, unaware that her touch, her genuine concern, sent shards of guilt piercing through their hardened hearts. The teapot, a silent observer to their charade, sat on the mantelpiece, its tarnished surface reflecting their distorted images. It was a constant presence in their lives, a malevolent puppet master pulling the strings of their descent into madness. John and Alice, their conversations now reduced to hushed whispers and furtive glances, found themselves walking on eggshells, terrified that a careless word, a misplaced bruise, would shatter the fragile illusion they had so carefully constructed. They resorted to desperate measures to maintain their charade, their days a carefully choreographed dance of deception. They feigned laughter, invented stories to explain their injuries, their lives reduced to a grotesque performance for the benefit of their unsuspecting daughter. The price of their silence, they soon realized, was far greater than they had anticipated. John, his mind teetering on the precipice of madness, saw opportunity in Lily's youthful exuberance. Her accidental bumps, her youthful clumsiness, became potential sources of income, each bruise a down payment on their twisted version of paradise. Alice, her maternal instincts warring with the insatiable hunger gnawing at her soul, recoiled in horror at John's suggestions. She had crossed countless lines, sacrificed her soul for the promise of a better life, but harming her own daughter was an abyss she couldn't bring herself to cross. Their arguments, once fueled by resentment and a shared sense of guilt, now centred around Lily's well-being, a perverse irony that underscored the depth of their depravity. They had become monsters in their own right, their love for their daughter a flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness. Lily, oblivious to the turmoil raging around her, revelled in the attention lavished upon her. She recounted stories of her life at college, her dreams for the future, unaware that her words were falling on deaf ears, her parents too consumed by their own demons to truly listen. Their paradise, purchased with blood and pain, had become a gilded cage, a prison of their own making. The tension in the house was as thick and suffocating as the humid summer air. It pressed down on them, a physical manifestation of their guilt and desperation. Lily, oblivious to the maelstrom swirling around her, chatted excitedly about a weekend trip with friends, her words like salt on an open wound. "We can't afford that," John snapped, his voice laced with an uncharacteristic bitterness. Lily, startled by his harsh tone, fell silent, her youthful exuberance extinguished by the look of cold fury on her father's face. Alice, her heart aching for her daughter and for the man she no longer recognised, tried to intervene. "John, it's just a weekend trip." Her words were cut short by the look in his eyes, a look that sent a shiver down her spine. It was the look of a predator sizing up its prey, the look of a man who had crossed a line and had no intention of turning back. "We can't afford anything!" John roared, his voice echoing through the silent house. "We can barely afford to keep a roof over our heads thanks to you." He jabbed a finger accusingly at Alice, his anger a venomous serpent striking out at the nearest target. John's words, fuelled by months of repressed guilt and self-loathing, hung in the air, a poisonous vapour that threatened to suffocate them all. Lily, tears welling up in her eyes, shrank back from her father, her face a mask of hurt and disbelief. The man standing before her, his face contorted in a grimace of rage, bore no resemblance to the kind, gentle father she had once known. "John! John! Stop it! You're scaring her!" Alice cried, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. She stepped in front of Lily, her body a shield protecting her daughter from the storm raging around them. "This isn't your fault, Lily. Go to your room," she whispered, her voice breaking with unshed tears. As Lily fled up the stairs, her sobs echoing through the silent house, John turned on Alice, his face a mask of cold fury. "This is all your fault!" he screamed, his voice raw with rage. "You and your damn teapot! You've ruined everything!" He lunged at her, his hands reaching for her throat, his fingers closing around her slender neck. Alice gasped for air, her eyes wide with terror. The teapot, as if sensing the escalating violence, hummed ominously, its once dull surface now glowing with a malevolent light. John's grip tightened, his rage a living thing, consuming him from the inside out. Alice struggled against him, her vision blurring at the edges. She could hear the blood pounding in her ears, a drumbeat of terror that mirrored the frantic thumping of her heart. Suddenly, John released her, his body collapsing to the floor with a sickening thud. Alice stared down at him, her chest heaving, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just transpired. John lay motionless, his eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling, a thin trickle of blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. The teapot, bathed in the eerie silence that followed the storm, seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. Alice, her legs trembling beneath her, slowly rose to her feet and approached the teapot, her gaze drawn to its tarnished surface. As she peered into its depths, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The teapot was overflowing with money, a seemingly endless cascade of $100 bills spilling onto the floor, burying John's lifeless body beneath a macabre shroud of wealth. Alice stared at the scene before her, her mind reeling. She had her paradise, but at what cost? The silence in the room was deafening. It pressed down on Alice heavier than any physical burden she had ever borne. The clinking of coins, once a symphony of hope and promise, now sounded like the mournful tolling of a funeral bell. The air, thick with the metallic scent of blood and the cloying sweetness of decay, caught in her throat, choking back the scream that threatened to erupt from her lips. She looked down at John's lifeless body, his face frozen in a grotesque parody of a smile, his eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. The man who had once shared her hopes and dreams, the man who had vowed to love and cherish her, now lay at her feet, another casualty in their insatiable pursuit of wealth. The weight of her actions, the sheer magnitude of their descent into madness, crashed over her like a tidal wave. The teapot, once a symbol of their twisted ambition, now stood as a silent accuser, its tarnished surface reflecting the shattered remnants of their souls. Their paradise, purchased with blood and pain, had become a tomb, a chilling testament to the corrosive power of unchecked greed. Lily. The thought of her daughter, her innocent face etched with concern, pierced through the fog of shock and despair that had enveloped Alice's mind. What had she done? What had she become? The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had traded her humanity, her very soul, for a handful of blood-soaked bills, and in doing so had condemned not only herself, but her daughter, to a life haunted by the shadows of her sins. Alice stumbled back from John's body, her hand reaching out for support, finding only the cold, unforgiving surface of a wall. Her reflection, a distorted spectre of her former self, stared back at her, her eyes hollow and haunted, her skin stretched taut over protruding bones. She looked like a stranger, a creature warped and twisted by the insatiable hunger that had consumed them both. The money, once a source of perverse comfort, now filled her with a sense of profound revulsion. It lay scattered around her, a macabre carpet woven from their broken dreams and shattered lives. Each bill, stained with their blood and their guilt, seemed to whisper accusations, mocking her with the hollow promise of a happiness they had never truly sought. The teapot, its surface gleaming with an almost otherworldly light, seemed to beckon her, its silent siren song promising solace, an escape from the unbearable weight of her actions. But Alice knew the truth. The teapot offered no salvation, no absolution. It was a deceiver, a peddler of false hope, its magic fueled by pain and despair. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the blood-soaked floor, Alice made a decision. She would not succumb to the siren song of the teapot. She would not allow its corrosive magic to poison her daughter's life. With a heavy heart and a soul stained with guilt, Alice turned her back on the promise of wealth and the twisted desires it had awakened within her. She had glimpsed the abyss, and in its depths she had seen her own reflection. It was a sight she would never forget, a chilling reminder of the price of unchecked greed and the enduring power of human folly.